Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Meals to Unalive 4, where we talk about a true crime case and make a death row meal from scratch. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. Today we're talking about a case that takes place in 1955, Alameda, California. Stephanie was 14 years old and attended Willard High School. She was very studious and she was very kind. Unfortunately, on April 28, 1955, Stephanie went missing, never to be seen again. The day started off like any other. She attended school and was let out at 3:15. Stephanie usually walked home with her friend Mary, and today was no exception. However, they did tend to stop at Dream Fluff Donuts, and then they did stop at Elmwood Pet Shop and picked up a book on parakeets, something that she actually shared in common with her killer. Mary and Stephanie parted ways near the Claremont Hotel. The hotel was less than a 5-minute walk away from Stephanie's home. When Stephanie failed to return home, her mother immediately knew that something was wrong. Usually she was home by about 4, and it wasn't like her to be late. Stephanie's mother immediately called her husband Charles Bryant. He also took it very seriously and was the one to report Stephanie missing by 4:15. At the very same time, 5 people saw a girl struggling in a car with a man. He was hitting her and she was screaming for help. Unfortunately, not one of those 5 people would attempt to help Stephanie or even call the cops to help her. They simply were bystanders. As a side note, if you see something suspicious, please call it in. If someone had taken the time to report what they saw that day, it's possible that Stephanie might still be with us, and that makes me so incredibly sad. Anyways, the car was a 1949 Chevy sedan, but unfortunately nobody bothered to get a license plate number either. For the next few days, there were no leads on Stephanie's whereabouts or what had happened to her. But on May 1st, on a nearby road, they did find Stephanie's textbook. One thing that detectives did notice is that the book was completely dry, which was significant because it had rained the previous night. So if the book had been dumped the night previous, the book would have been soaked, but it wasn't. It was bone dry, which means it had for sure been dumped off that morning. The next lead on Stephanie's whereabouts would not come until July 15th. Georgia Abbott was looking for something to wear for a party that was being hosted by a friend of hers. So she was looking through some boxes in the basement to find something suitable to wear when she stumbled upon a red purse, and she immediately knew that this did not belong to her. When she opened the wallet, she actually found Stephanie's ID, and the friend that was helping her look through said boxes noticed that it was the missing girl. So luckily they did call the police. The police came and did a thorough search of the entire Abbott household, especially the basement since that's where Stephanie's purse had been found. So in the Abbott basement, it was unfinished. So it was a dirt floor. There was no concrete. So they decided to dig up the basement and they did find more of Stephanie's personal items. They did find her glasses, her bra, and more of her textbooks. Police were immediately suspicious of George's husband, Burton W. Abbott. The entire time that police were searching the home, he seemed to just ignore their presence altogether. He was busy doing a crossword puzzle, he was paying attention to his parakeets, really just avoiding them altogether, which is just super weird because I'm pretty sure if anybody else found a missing girl's ID in their basement along with more of her personal effects, you would be more concerned and not just working on your crossword puzzle. So police decided to bring him in, and from the get-go, they did not feel like he was being very truthful. He kept changing his story, but the first story that he gave was that on the day that Stephanie was abducted, that he was at the family's cabin. But witnesses placed Abbott at the same donut shop that the girls had visited that day at 3:20 and then leaving in his 1949 Chevy sedan. Just as a side note, I did want to talk about this family's cabin because it was just too crazy to not add in and too interesting to not tell you guys about. This cabin was located in Trinity County and was owned by Georgia's side of the family, but its history is very gruesome. Before George's family had acquired said cabin, it was owned by a man named Lloyd Snyder. Snyder had owned the cabin for over a decade, but in 1951, he had allegedly got into an argument with his best friend. He ended up shooting the friend and then dismembered his body, put his remains in a gunny sack, and then buried the remains somewhere on the property. Snyder would end up serving time for this, but before he went to San Quentin prison, he transferred the ownership of the cabin over to George's family, which is how it was acquired by them. Detectives actually thought that it was Snyder who might have been responsible for Stephanie's murder because he actually made bail only a month before Stephanie went missing, which is wild to me. How are you going to kill someone, dismember them, and then serve 4 years? Because remember, he committed this murder in 1951 and Stephanie went missing in 1955. So he served less than 4 years for these atrocities and were out again. I guess Snyder had an airtight alibi though, because he was only a person of interest for a very short time, and I couldn't find out how he was dismissed as a person of interest, but he was not on the radar for very long. Overall, detectives' main suspect was Burton Abbott. At the time of Stephanie's abduction, Abbott was a 27-year-old student at UC Berkeley, and he was going to school for accounting. He was married to Georgia Abbott, and they did have a young son together. He was smaller in stature for a man and weighed only about 130 pounds. When Burton was a child, he did have tuberculosis, so he did lose part of his lungs. And because of this, he would struggle to play any sports or do anything physical, which is something that the defense would try to use to their advantage during the trial. On July 20th, a search party found Stephanie's remains. Her underwear was tied around her neck. She was missing her bra because that was found in Abbott's basement. She had multiple fractures on her head, and she most likely died of blunt force trauma. Sadly, Stephanie had been SA'd, and she did have defensive wounds. The search party who found Stephanie's remains also found an empty grave in another spot on the property. It looks as if whoever had buried her started digging in another place and hit a bunch of tree roots, which forced them to dig a second grave. Abbott was seen near the cabin on April 29th, the day after Stephanie's disappearance at the Wildwood Inn, from 2 p.m. to midnight, and later was joined by his brother and sister-in-law at 3 a.m. at the cabin. Abbott left the morning of May 1st from the cabin back home and took a separate car from his brother, and this was about the same time that Stephanie's book was found at the side of the road that was completely dry. Authorities then decided to search Abbott's car. They found 6 hairs that were very close to Stephanie's hair color and 18 fibers that matched the same garments that Stephanie was wearing that same day. In the back of the car, they did find blood deep in the floor mats, but the top was clean, which indicated to detectives that the floor mat had been scrubbed clean, but there was still remnants of blood deep in the fibers. In the box that Georgia Abbott found, there was also a pair of muddy boots that detectives confiscated, and they decided to test the mud that was stuck to those boots, and they were direct match to Stephanie's grave that she was found in. Several fragments of bloodstained cleaning tissue had been carried off by pack rats from the gravesite to a nearby nest, and it was the same type of tissue that Abbott tended to use. When Abbott was first questioned by the police, Abbott described in detail that he had taken a route from Alameda to the cabin in Trinity County, and he did not go through Sacramento. Yet when the police questioned Abbott's brother, he told him in detail that Abbott had stopped in Sacramento. When Abbott was told what his brother said, his story immediately changed, and he said that he had stopped there at the office of State of Bureau of Land Management about 4 p.m., gave a description of the office, and then the next day said, although he had gone to Sacramento, he had not been able to find the office. So his story is constantly changing, and none of it is really all that consistent. At the trial, Abbott testified that he was not in Berkeley on April 28th, that he started for the cabin from his home at about 10:45 a.m., and after that stopped to say goodbye to his wife at the beauty shop where she was employed, then proceeded to Sacramento where he made an unsuccessful search for the land office. He said that he stopped at a restaurant around 3 p.m. where he was served by a waitress who had blonde hair, around 25 to 30 years old. He also testified that he stopped at the Wildwood Inn for a drink about 8:30 p.m. and then drove to the mountains for the cabin. There was a huge amount of conflict when it came to his alibi and what he did that day. He was seen at a state controller's office in Oakland at 1:30 and then was at the beauty shop where his wife worked about 2:30 p.m. And on top of that, there was no waitress on duty between 2 and 10, even though he said that he was there at 3. He had said that a blonde woman between 25 and 30 had served him, but there was no waitress that even resembled a woman that looked like that who worked for that restaurant. The manager of the Wildwood Inn and his wife, both of whom knew Abbott, testified that Abbott was not at the inn on the night of April 28th. Finally, a man drove by the cabin around 10 p.m. and said that there was no lights on and no other signs of life, that someone was there at the cabin. Abbott did agree to do a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. Abbott's lawyers claimed that Abbott could not have committed Stephanie's murder because of his condition and he was too frail. He was only 134 pounds while Stephanie was 105 pounds, and there's no way, they said, that he could have dug a grave up the side of a hill and put her in it. They even had Abbott take off his shirt during the trial so that the jurors could see all of the scars and the fact that he had missing ribs from when he had tuberculosis. They did end up putting him on the stand, which would end up being a mistake. He constantly contradicted himself and would eventually answer consistently with "I don't know" or "I don't remember." In the end, the jury debated for 7 days, and on January 25th, they had come to a verdict. Abbott's mother, Elsie, screamed and ran from the courtroom. In the chaos, many didn't hear the second guilty verdict, but it really didn't matter. Both the first-degree murder and kidnapping charges carried the death penalty. A reporter tried to ask Stephanie's mother, Mary Bryant, about the proceedings and the trial itself, but she had no interest in it. All she wanted to know was when she could collect her daughter from the morgue. She said, and I quote, "Now we can have Steffi back." On the morning of March 15, 1957, the Court of Appeals denied Abbott's stay of execution. His lawyer, George T. Davis, made a frantic phone call to the governor, Goodwin Knight, who was on board the SS Hancock. As Abbott's 10 a.m. execution time neared, Knight agreed to a 1-hour stay. His lawyer did try to ask for another hour, but it was too late. Abbott was led to the gas chamber, and at 11:18 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Abbott's belongings were given to his widow, and the $67 left in his canteen account was handed to his mother. The San Quentin chief psychiatrist recalled his final conversation with Abbott. He asked Abbott to confess to his crimes and asked the governor for clemency. "Doc, I can't admit it," Abbott had said. "Think what it would do to my mother." Elsie Abbott, Burton's mother, would proclaim his innocence until the day that she died. She also claimed that it was her brother, Burton's uncle, who had actually committed the murder and framed him. As far as why she thought this, I couldn't find out why, but that's what she proclaimed until she died. The last meal that Burton W. Abbott selected was jumbo battered prongs, raviolis, salad that mainly consisted of romaine lettuce and vinaigrette, chocolate cake, and a pack of cigarettes. Overall, I would give this meal a 7 out of 10 on meals that I would want to eat last before I die. I made a 4 cheese ravioli, a dark chocolate cake with boysenberry filling, a basic salad, and then battered prawns. I did use a pesto for my raviolis, and I went ahead and skipped the cigarettes since that is not my thing. One thing that I've come to love about some of these meals is that it's different foods that don't necessarily go together, but just something that they wanted. So while this doesn't necessarily all go together, I think that it was still really fun, and I really enjoyed making this today. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you want to know more about this case or you just want like a good discussion, please join me on the dissection where I go in detail and have my opinions and we discuss this case further. And if not, I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.